Time to go back to the days of ancient role play. Time for another dungeon tale. So Clay over at Terminally Nerdy told me an interesting story about the chicken and the rope, which I found very entertaining. In return, he had asked me to tell a story about the best magic item, most interesting magic item I had either received or given to players. So for my magical item, I chose Heward's Mystical Organ. Heward, I assume, was the player character of one of the original creators, test players of Dungeons and Dragons. Ernie and Gary Gygax had many friends that helped them develop the game, and they ended up incorporating their characters into the game as legendary figures like Mordenkainen, Tensor, Bigby, Heward. Heward was a gentleman who created an artifact. Artifacts back in first edition were extremely powerful items. Uh, I and fellow DMs considered them to be as close to the power of the gods on the prime material plane as you could get being a player character. How that worked out is we basically had a level scale for the power of magic. Mortals could do a certain level of magic. Anything an artifact could do could cancel the mortal level of magic. For example, somebody puts up a wall of force just casting a normal spell. Well, if you hit it with an artifact that can do a dispel, then it blows it away, usually no problem. Heward's mystical organ was essentially a church pipe organ. It had 77 great pipes, 77 small pipes, an array of black and white keys, 13 ivory stops, and 3 foot pedals. Normally, you would find it in some place that people have not been around for a very long time. And usually, the organ would be in a state of disrepair. It is powered by a bellows that has an air elemental pumping it. So it'll work, but time has silenced some of the pipes, got some of the keys stuck, and you were lucky to be able to find a good functioning set of keys to invoke its powers. Now, the original version, I believe, came with 50 options that you could roll up in the guide as far as powers that it could do. I never pre rolled these abilities because it was more fun to have the people experiment with the organ, different settings, different keys, different pedal pushes, and see what happens. Sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. If players could figure out a proper song to play on the organ and all of the keys were available to do it, they could activate beneficial powers from the organ. It was a bit limiting because the organ was this huge monstrosity built into wherever they found it, so it would have to be stuff that they could do there on the spot, or possibly buffs that they could put on themselves and head out to do adventuring. Either way, it was a bit limited just because it was stuck there. Now, if you played the music wrong, all kinds of bad stuff could happen. Not only were there powers you could roll up randomly that just destroy the character, but most of the time, if you played the organ wrong, hit a wrong note, it would summon in something that you don't want there, and then you've had a problem. I came up with an interesting idea where I took this organ and I put it at the bottom of Castle Cormanthor, right in the middle of the ruins of Myth Draenor. I've covered a bit about the ruins of Myth Draenor before, but just to recap, it's an ancient elven city that was overrun by a demon army in the past. Its current state today is it's in ruins, being constantly fought over by various monsters and power groups. And there are portals all over the place, which are letting in constant streams of new awfulness into this city. And on top of it, which I did not cover, is the entire city is cloaked in something called a mythal. And this mythal is kind of broken and damaged at this point. So when you cast spells within the city's boundaries, there's a chance for a wild surge. Wild surges can help a spellcaster, but in many cases, it spells doom. It was a useful place to send Monty Hall characters. It provided a challenge worthy of them, and it gave me a means to remove some of the massive amounts of pesky magic items that these characters inevitably collect. One of these groups was a group of 3 elven characters that a friend of mine played, uh, Eldrick Elweir, Mytor the Merciless, and I believe it was Arson Firestarter. a fire mage. These characters he had played since youth. They had experienced the Warp Greyhawk phase of our campaigns, and they had been cleaned out pretty well, but they were still uber powerful. Once I told them about the existence of Myth Draenor, they were such powerful elves that they decided that they were going to reconquer the city for Elvendom. Yeah, good luck. These three elves were all triple classed. I believe that all of their levels were above 15. I know one of them had ninth level spells, so we had at least one 18th level magic user. They had really powerful magic items. One of them, the leader, Eldrick, he wielded the Ring of Gax, which was a powerful artifact. Arson, he had Black Razor, which was a sword that appeared far too many times throughout my years of playing Dungeons and Dragons. And Mytor, I don't remember specifically what he had, but after all, he was merciless. The three cousins waged their campaign to clear Myth Draenor. It made for many, many, many games full of encounters and epic battles. They were pretty clever about how they went about it. They never actually were able to conquer part of the city, but they drained the resources of many of the bad guys that were there. While playing, I was sure to mention that ever so often they would hear organ music playing from a distance. Normally, they would take note of it right away because that's kind of unusual and start heading towards the sound. Normally, they would run into encounters along the way and get stalled. Sometimes they were able to hear that the music would go on and falter like a wrong note was hit and then go quiet for a few days. Eventually, they made a good enough plan to get themselves all the way to the castle on a night where the music was continuing on for longer than normal. Now, this castle I had filled with Beta Zoo top to bottom. That was what they were calling devils at the time. So, a castle full of devils that they had to fight their way into to figure out what was this organ music about. Using spells and their rogue abilities, they were smart and snuck into the castle. Anything they needed to take out along the way, they did really well at doing it without attracting attention. And eventually, they worked their way down into the dungeons where they were confronted by a very large set of steps and a very large set of doors. And of course, it was guarded by some really powerful Beta Zoo. During all this time, I made sure that they were aware that the organ was continuing to play, that the music was getting louder. In fact, the ground was starting to rumble from the notes being played. Um, they could tell by the time they reached this large door that things were coming to a crescendo. Now, if they had been stopped before that, I would have stopped the music because I wanted to make sure the players were there for the climax. They broke their way into the room, and it turned out to be a very large cavern. At one side of the cavern was the organ being played by a pit fiend. In front of the organ were a horde of Beta Zoo guarding him, and a very large portal was opening on the opposite wall from them. It was huge. And they started to freak out because they realized that the pit fiend was summoning in something really big or very large, something that they needed to be concerned about. The obvious target was the pit fiend playing the music. Stop him, hopefully the spell will end and whatever's coming through that gate won't get there. Unfortunately for the characters, as they discovered, he had put up a wall of force around himself using the organ. None of their attempts to bring it down worked, so they ended up fighting the horde of Beta Zoo that were in this cavern. That gave the pit fiend time to finish what he was doing, and when he finished his song, he stood up and turned around with a big smile on his face as the heads of dragons started coming through the portal. There was one of each color of the chromatic spectrum. There was a black, a red, a green, a white, and a blue. The characters were pretty concerned. They had fought dragons before, but they never fought five dragons. Once they had defeated the Beta Zoo to a point where they figured they could switch attention to these five dragons coming through the portal, they saw the front feet of Tiamat stepping through the gate. It wasn't five dragons, it was the mother of all evil dragons being summoned from a plane of hell. The pit fiend dropped his wall of force and joined the battle. Along with Tiamat, there was a stream of Beta Zoo at her feet, flooding into the cavern. Oh my, What are they going to do? It's time to talk a little bit about this sword, Black Razor, which Arson had been using throughout this battle. This sword came from a module, White Plume Mountain, and it granted the ability that when you slew a creature, it would grant you its hit points and hit dice. So as you killed things, you would get even more powerful. To limit this, I threw in something. Once you had absorbed twice your original hit dice worth of souls or power, there was a increasing chance per hit dice that you would go berserk. While in berserk mode, I made the character roll wisdom saves for anything that they decided to do. And once you reached a certain level of berserk, hit dice, you would go absolutely nuts, and I'd be totally in control of your character and try and come up with the most awful things I could have them do for the situation. It's the price you paid for wielding Black Razor. Back at this time, we used party initiative. Basically, the good guys would roll versus the bad guys, and one side would get to go first entirely, and then the other side would get to retaliate. We also did initiative for every combat round, so it could flip back and forth. Unfortunately for the group, they lost initiative. And even more unfortunately, Arson had consumed so many hit dice that he lost his mind. Well, Tiamat wasn't messing around. She opened up with all 5 heads, so 5 dragon breaths hit the party. I believe there were some henchmen there at the time, and I know I had an NPC character. And the result ended up being that one of the main characters was obliterated. Another of them was damaged to the point of almost being dead. All of the beta zoo that were around him got cooked. My NPC got killed, and I don't believe that the blast actually hurt Arson very much because he had tons of hit points from all these beta zoo he had been slaughtering. So after a few other attacks, the only people left, I believe, were Mytor and Arson. 2 people against all these beta zoo and the dragon. Of course, the beta zoo that were around them were now dead, so Mytor got the chance to run for the organ because Arson was looking at Mytor, licking his lips like, you look tasty. Things were going from bad to even worse. Mytor's solution, start hitting keys on that organ. Just try anything he can to do something to save the day because he was pretty convinced that they were screwed. Well, I really needed a way to finish this. I hadn't considered the party as winning, and it would be really bad to let Tiamat break out of Castle Cormanthor and mess around in Myth Draenor. So I decided to pick a power, and to pick a bad power because he was playing very badly. So I chose Earthquake, which brought the entire cavern down on everything. This ended up saving the day. The gate was buried under rock. Tiamat was driven back through the portal. The Beta Zoo down there were killed, and the party got their defeat, which at that point they deserved. But Trixie Elves is, one of them had a contingency on himself that if he died, him and any gear would be teleported back to a safe place where loyal people had access to a ring of 3 wishes, and there was a high level cleric. So he was brought back to life, and through the ring, he was able to wish his compatriots back. They wanted to get back all of their gear. I basically allowed them to summon back the bodies with whatever gear was on them, but I made everything roll saves versus being crushed. And anything that they had in their hand, I gave a chance that it was dropped when they were smashed. Poor Black Razor, trapped under tons and tons of rubble under Castle Cormanthor. Um, I would say I was pretty satisfied with that ending. They lost all the henchmen they brought. They didn't have nearly enough wishes to get them back. And I wiped out one of my NPC characters to boot. So, Heward's Mystical Organ is technically probably the weirdest item I ever gave out, although the character only got to use it once. I was able to use it with an interesting story to go along with it, and I had a lot of fun doing that. Well, Clay, what's next? I'd like to hear about your favorite role playing experience. What was some game or something you did that was thoroughly enjoyable and you would love to be able to experience that again? I've linked Clay's previous video down in the description, and I'll be back in another month or so with something else.